My name is Karoline Mueller. I went vegan in 2004 for health reasons. And I had, a few years later, I fell back. I was vegetarian for 5 years before, starting in 1999. Cheese addiction had a little flare up later on, but it didn't take that long for me to realize that isn't a good thing. It took me also a long time to look at the ethical aspects of veganism. I blame it on my dad. It had to do with discussions I had with my dad when I was 18, I think, because without knowing anyone who was vegetarian or vegan, I started to have discussions with my dad. And he was very convincing that eating animals is just part of life. It's the big picture of how life on Earth works.
So, 1999, you were a vegetarian. What exactly made you go vegetarian? That wasn't health reasons, the vegan was health reasons, right?
It was a little bit health reasons too, but I think the main reason I went vegetarian is because I met vegetarians. And it just felt the right thing to do. But the cheese and ice creams thing was really running strong in me. I had, actually at the same time I went vegetarian, I also met 2 vegan friends, and like I would go over and help with their garden, and they would order pizza, and the half for another friend of mine, me, would be with cheese, and their half would be without cheese, and I wondered how that could taste any good. And now I can only wonder how I ever ate that much cheese.
In 2004, did you go vegan right away?
I think I was reading a book by Dean Ornish, who interestingly at that time, I think to this day he doesn't really identify as vegan, but something just triggered me, and maybe hanging out more with them, my 2 vegan friends, that made me decide that that would be a good thing for me.
Like, was there something that made you do it overnight, and how long did it take you to get into it?
I remember, so they had a box of tofujis in their freezer, which I polished off, I think, in one setting. And I remember sort of crying over my food habits, and then deciding that at least I could give up, the regular ice cream and cheese.
What are tofujis?
Tofujis, they're little tofu. It's a brand that makes these tofu-based little ice cream things.
It's a dessert.
Yeah, that was probably my big intro into vegan food.
So I thought you said you did it originally for health reasons.
Yeah, so it was for health reasons, but it started with eating tofujis. Don't ask. So then for health reasons, yes, when I became a vegetarian, I first did really well and lost weight. And then, of course, I would just totally shift towards cheese and ice cream. And then I was back with my food addiction. The same thing happened with going vegan. So I quickly found the vegan frozen desserts, and I just call them vegan ice cream. And yeah, I had the same, food addictive behaviors, and the same struggle actually. And that made me then think, I was at the point where people sort of try to talk me healthier eating and not being vegan, but by that time, 2007, 2008, around those years, I couldn't be not vegan anymore. I was really then... Because I couldn't bring myself to eat animal products anymore. So at that point, I didn't care, like even if by eating some meat or whatever, I could be healthier, I couldn't bring myself to do that.
So it sounds like you went for ethical reasons.
At that point, yeah.
When did it become a health thing?
It started out with a health thing. But then it didn't work with the tofujis. Yes. It started out as a health thing over reading Dean Ornish's book. I think I read Eat More, Weigh Less. Way less, yeah.
Okay. Oh, Eat More, Weigh Less.
Yeah. That's what I was reading. Eating tofujis.
Yeah.
I was in a vegan household. There was no regular ice cream. Otherwise, I would have eaten regular ice cream.
So Eat More, Weigh Less was a book by Dean Ornish that you read. You eventually brought ethics into the equation.
Yeah.
You're reading this book, and you weren't really doing it for ethics, and you weren't really eating it healthfully either.
I didn't completely understand what really eating healthfully for me means. It took till 2011 where I then really started to understand what whole food plant-based means. And that's when I had a major shift in my health and lost a lot of weight.
What were the health issues?
I had really, really sore feet. And that, after I went whole food plant-based, it went away. Sadly, it starts to creep in a little bit. I don't know what it is. It's something I need to figure out.
Was there any other health issues?
I actually moved a lot around that time. I used to do a movement form that's called NIA. NIA is choreographed movement to music, and I loved it. I did it a lot. I went like 4 or 5 times a week, and I did yoga. So I should have been quite fit, but I really wasn't. I always had really low blood pressure, and that started to creep up. So I didn't have major health issues diagnosed. It just didn't feel great, right?
You're talking about while you were still vegetarian?
No, while I was vegan.
When you first went vegan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before I went whole food plant-based.
I got you. So you went vegan for health reasons, then you became more ethical, and then you became whole food plant-based.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
Can't make it.
So in 1999 you went vegetarian. In 2004 you went vegan for health reasons, but didn't really know how to do it. And then when did it become more ethical? And
some years later.
Yeah.
That was so really slowly creeping in. That took a long time. Like after I went vegan, sometime later, one of my vegan friends asked me why I'm vegan. And she asked me specifically if it was, what I think about ethical reasons. And at that point I was still so, no. I couldn't admit it to myself.
But you were already vegan.
I was already vegan, yeah, but I still couldn't. Maybe because I wouldn't have known how to deal with other people in my life.
Like who?
My family and my friends. And
So how do you deal with them?
with a lot of love and patience.
Is that hard?
It's hard at times. I'm not a philosopher. On one hand, I have a mind that likes to see sort of black and white, but I also have an understanding that the world is not black and white. And so I tend to shy away from that. But once I went whole food plant-based, my mode of that I have to convince other people really kicked in hard. And I really felt very strongly about it. I actually became a Food for Life instructor because my friends didn't want to hear about it anymore. And I decided I want an audience, and I want an audience who voluntarily comes.
The ethics, that was inspired by a friend, you said, that was just basically questioning you, but you were at first standoffish.
Yeah.
So how were you able to finally open your mind up to that, or open your eyes up?
That's an interesting question, because it was in the days when I didn't have we're talking 2006 and 2007, and I didn't spend much time on YouTube. I didn't have internet at home, so it's not like I was sitting at home and watching documentaries about it, or I didn't read books about it. I think I just needed the time to create space in this for myself. Because remember back then when I was 18, I actually started thinking about it. But it took that long for me to come to a place where I can say, I don't want to participate. I was not yet at a place where I was out there doing vegan activism. To this day, when I think about the philosophical underpinning and the ethical side, in my mind it gets complicated so quickly that I sort of retreat in, it's like, it's not who I am. I think that humans would be better off if they didn't have to engage in killing animals. The whole scenarios, what if you are living in an environment where that's the only thing that can feed you? I can say, yeah, I mean, every creature wants to survive, and so these humans can do what they need to do to survive. This is not where I am, that's not where the people around me are, and we don't need to do it to survive. And so we don't need to bring that violence into this world. I did not watch Dominion or Earthling or...
You just kind of think about these things as time goes on. Maybe somebody says something to you, but...
It sort of filters in.
Yeah.
So books I'm reading, conversations, it's through the air, through being in nature.
Do you feel like you're more or less healthy now doing this? The way you're living and eating, not eating animals?
Oh, I'm definitely more healthy not eating animals, for sure.
How do you know?
How do I know? Well, there are a lot of studies on that.
But how do you know it's working for you?
Because I get a sick feeling in my stomach just thinking about animal foods. I think I'm not going to do a test run and see what happens.
Yeah. I think at some point you said, even if it wasn't healthy for you,
I couldn't go back, no. But so it's not my body, right? But in 2012, I started to date someone who was not vegan. He really wanted to be with me, so I talked about the way I eat and why, and he was totally okay with it, and he loves to cook, so he cooked a lot for both of us. We started to live together, so he 95% or more ate this way. But once a week, he used to go out with friends, and being out in a restaurant, he sometimes would still order something. And I think after a while, he felt that it just didn't feel good in his body. It was the one time where my pushy nature, I was really holding back and biting my tongue and not pushing him. It was like he needs to come to this completely by himself. And it took about half a year. Then he said, I'm vegan.
Wow, that's awesome. You said 18. What happened when you were 18?
I had discussions with my dad about eating. When I was 13, we had sort of a lot of not feeling well in my family, a lot of colds and flus and like always being under the weather, allergies. My brother found a doctor, holistic doctor, whatever that means. Anyway, he talked about eating raw vegetables, raw fruit, even like raw grains. So instead of eating oatmeal, we would actually like shred grains like wheat, oat, barley, rye, and soak it overnight and eat it with yogurt and fruit in the morning. It was all around this idea that raw foods are so much better. But we didn't go plant-based completely. So we would still eat cheese and meat, but we never ate much meat in my family. It was very expensive at the time in Germany. We were 4 kids in the family, so we had meat twice a week, but we would eat sausages and cheese. And I liked meat before, but I wasn't that much into it. So when the discussion was, what do we have on Sunday, I was always like, we don't need to eat meat. So I was really pushing in this direction. And then I started to have discussions with my dad.
Tell me a little bit more about the discussions with your dad.
So my parents are born in the late 1920s. And so they, of course, went through the war years in Germany. And also around that time, very, very common for families to have animals, small animals at home, right? So one grandparent, they always had goats, and they had goat milk. And the other grandparents, they had rabbits and chickens and sheep. My dad always says that his dad, that he couldn't kill a fly. So he was the only child in the family. And as a boy, he started to be the dedicated person to slaughter animals. He talked about the first chicken he had to slaughter where he didn't manage to hold on to the chicken and the chicken was flying around the house after the head was off. nice stories. And also then they had rabbits. I'm sorry, it's really... they had rabbits. And so, of course, you raise an animal. They're cute little rabbits. He was a boy, so of course he would play with the rabbit. But then came the day when he had to slaughter the rabbit. And just recently he retold that again, that it was really hard for him to slaughter the rabbit. So how do you do it? He would play rough with the rabbit, and the rabbit bit him. And then he would get angry, and then he could slaughter the rabbit. But so it was very much, you see, it's very much part of his life that you needed to eat, you needed to have animals to eat. If you think about the amount of food that goes towards raising an animal, it's just mind-blowing to me. That idea that we need to eat the animal is so ingrained in so many people that we waste food on the animal even in war times.
And what kind of conversations did you have with them when you were 18?
I would question if you really need to eat meat, and that story was basically his answer to it, that it's important and it's part of life. It definitely was part of his life.
Vegetarian came years later.
If I read, it came 13 years later.
So you met these vegetarians in 1999, right? That was enough for you to give up eating meat?
I came to the US in 96, and I studied chemistry. I was in this group at the University of Houston, and we would often go out eat. And the US, when you go out eat, what do you eat? You eat meat. I ate more meat in those years than probably in the whole rest of my life. Wow. And I guess once I met vegetarian, I was like, okay, I'm done with it. It's like enough.
Yeah. That's interesting because there's historically been times where countries have had very little meat.
Necessity, because there isn't enough food.
That or if they're in a time of war.
Yeah.
It didn't Germany take...
Well, what Germany did, wherever they went, they took all the livestock.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically starved the Dutch. Mm-hmm. They took everything, or the Danish too. I mean, it's like one of the scientific studies actually that shows the decrease in heart disease in those countries because the Germans came and took all the livestock, and then they took food too. But so that belief that we need the animal to be strong and be soldiers or whatever, it was that ingrained.
But it was actually helping the countries they were taking the animals from.
Well, except that it took so much food that people were really starving.
Yeah, and some people probably benefited from that, I guess, right?
Some,
maybe, yeah. But then here you are, and you're a living example of going from one extreme to the other. You got too much meat, and it sounds like you got sick of it.
I got sick of it, yes. I did. In my family, I never cooked the meat, right? That was my sister, my dad would cook the meat. Except for one time, I never did, and I had just started to actually learn how to cook meat, and then I was done.
The vegetarians were making an easy sell.
That was very easy, yeah.
Veganism comes along a little later because I guess vegetarian didn't really help you with some of your health stuff.
Right, because with all the cheese and the ice cream, it cannot help.
Okay, you learn, vegan can be healthier, but then you're like, but it could also be really tasty and yummy and...
and I can keep overeating.
Yeah. And then you're like, wow, the ethics start creeping in. So maybe that helped you. Do you think that might have helped you endure what it took to not quit on veganism when it wasn't? When it wasn't really,
absolutely.
Because veganism didn't really work for your health if you were still eating junk food.
Yeah.
So then you go ethical, and then you're like, man, I'll find a way to make this work. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so how did you discover whole plant foods?
So the same two friends who were vegan, they also knew about John McDougall. In the mid years, I had looked at his webpage, but I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. Now that I say it, it actually should give me a little empathy for my friends who look at his webpage and don't get it. But in 2011, a very close friend of mine had triple bypass surgery, And I decided to really take a hard look at what food can do. And I really dived deep. And I also had access to internet in a whole different way at that point. And I signed up to John McDougall. He offered these advanced study weekends where he had like a speaker series for a long weekend. Of course, I never went to California. I just did it on the internet. But that's when I was exposed to all these plant-based doctors, you know, T. Colin Campbell, and Neil Barnard, and Michael Clapper, and you name them.
You got thrown right...
Eating it up at that point.
You got thrown right into the vegan wolves. What changed after you went whole plant food?
That I pissed off my friends.
How?
Because I was very judgmental.
Oh. You mean your vegan friends?
No, all my friends.
Oh.
Because I remember one time, so I didn't have internet at home yet, and I wanted to watch all these things, so I would go to another friend's house who was out of town at the time, but another friend was house sitting, and she came in with someone, and they brought in pizza, and I said something along the lines, enjoy your pizza with poison, thinking of the cheese on top. I didn't handle it very well.
How did they take that?
I'm not sure they understood what the heck I'm talking about.
Are you still friends with them?
Yeah.
Okay. Are they vegan yet?
No. So of my close friends, I actually didn't convince anyone, but I had some really surprising conversions where I was talking to someone at a conference, at a Superconductivity conference, and then I see them years later and they come up to me and say, because of you I went vegan.
Wow.
And we had like one, 15-minute conversation about it. So maybe that gave me the idea that it's much easier if there is not that closeness. Like nobody in my family went completely vegan. They went a lot more plant forward. Especially my sister who has health problems, and my parents, my stepmom, she has arthritis problems. So they really cut out many things. The cute thing is they asked me what to substitute for butter. And together we were talking, and they now make a chickpeas paste. And that's what they use for butter. That works for them. I propose variations for them, and they say, no, that's fine, works for us, we're good. It's just mashed chickpeas.
Sounds like hummus.
No, they don't even put tahini or the lemon juice in. It's really just plain chickpeas. They just want to have something creamy on their bread. Germans eat a lot of bread. But so yeah, it's that closeness that makes it, I think, more confrontational, or the expectations are higher, and that makes it more difficult to start thinking about it yourself because you're just pushing back. Or it's weird. That space is really weird.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I don't know if anybody's really said it quite like that, and you're right. I think people have alluded to it, but you're hitting it. You're hitting the nail on the head right there for sure. That it's a little more challenging for family and friends, but that doesn't mean expect it to be, I guess, right? I mean, don't you think you still should try to advocate to family and friends?
I think you just have to have very sneaky strategies how to do it. You can't do it like direct. I mean, if some family member asks you directly, that's fine. I've been asked, but then also understand that it's time to step back and give them their space. I think that's the biggest thing with families, that people have space to figure it out.
I had a friend ask me, what should I tell my mother who's watching the grandkids and their grandkids are sick? What should I tell them to eat or drink or whatever, like echinacea tea or something? And I'm like, well, I mean, I would tell them that people I know who raise their children plant-based rarely get sick. And she's like, I don't want to tell them that, And she's probably right, because they just wanted to know what kind of tea or something, and here you're telling them to raise their child completely different. And it's their family, and they might take it personally, or maybe that's too aggressive. Have you learned any ways or have any tips on how to take a more passive yet assertive approach?
I think it's listening to the right openings, and it requires a lot of patience. And can get very frustrating. I think it's more hoping that someone else goes into the life of my family member, that they hear it from someone else. So that's part of why I really wanted to go out there and talk about it to people. That because if there are enough people there, they're bound to hear it from someone else. The big circle.
Yeah.
It's like, it needs to travel so that unrelated, someone else enters their life and talks about it.
Oh, okay, gotcha. You've got experience in chemistry, right?
I'm a chemist. I'm
Chemist.
a PhD chemist, but in inorganic chemistry.
That's cool.
I
Okay.
never had the memory for organic chemistry. I'm sad to say I really wanted to study biochemistry.
I guess that doesn't really relate then, per se.
It helps a little bit to understand the biological stuff, but I mean not in detail because it's so complicated. It's a field I'm not working in.
Can you share any way that in which that might help you be more analytical, or do you use what you've learned there in any way?
Well, I'm always surprised when people tell me, "Oh, you think so much like a scientist or like analytical," because to me it's normal. So it's like asking the fish what water tastes like, because it's just the people I mix with. They think in certain ways. It sometimes maybe can be confining to this one tool, and I think I'm someone who mixes a lot with people who are not scientists, so I can go back and forth between worlds a little bit, but I'm still shocked when someone immediately pitches me with, "Oh, you're a scientist and you think in these structures or something."
Obviously, you're intelligent enough to get a PhD in chemistry. You're not just somebody who's on a fad diet.
But I wouldn't make that argument actually, because if you look around, if you look at certain MDs, for example, who talk about this or that diet, so the training is not a complete protection against nonsense.
Yeah. But a lot of those doctors, I haven't seen any really. I mean, I've looked a little bit. I think if you have your PhD, you've got a little more education, don't you? Because it goes further, doesn't it?
As a PhD MD, yeah, you do more.
Yeah.
You do more research.
Mm-hmm. You might think a little more critically. And also, the ones that are touting the whole carnivore, keto, paleo thing, they don't have any relevant clinical experience. There might be like an orthopedics or something. They haven't studied nutrition. They're not in lifestyle medicine.
There are certain cardiologists who you would think should have the training.
Yeah.
And they still don't get it. So.
But there's a lot of plant-based cardiologists.
And the nice thing is they're getting more. They seem to sprout everywhere now these days, which is great.
Did you do a little bit of research into this to understand the science aspects of it?
Not deeply into the medical research, because once it goes into the details, that would require another lifetime of studying.
You did, though, pursue the food.
It's the Food for Life instructor program that the Physicians Committee offers for people to go out and do cooking classes, because what it comes down to in the end, what I experienced myself, is you need to feed yourself and you need to know what to do.
Food's a little bit like chemistry, right?
It is a lot like chemistry.
Yeah. So maybe you apply it in that way. I mean, it sounds like you're taking. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if you've applied your skills toward this, and evolved in a way that's using your education, your past, your history. Maybe the food is medicine.
You bring everything in, but I also, before I started studying chemistry, and while I was studying chemistry in Germany, I actually was a violin and piano teacher. So I also learned about how people learn. I got really into nonviolent communication. And so, you bring all these different things together. At one point during my studies here, I was really depressed. I really didn't know if I wanted to go on studying, and someone was talking about permaculture. And so I did a permaculture certificate. That's when I met those vegetarians. And so I learned about designing to fit many, many different aspects, to have one design element that fulfills many different purposes. And that's what I like about food so much, is that the fact what I choose to eat, it's, it has an effect on me as a singular person, but it has an effect on everything around it. So I think it's a wonderful example of how you can design to minimize your impact on this system that's our Earth.
What is Food for Life? And tell me a little bit more about that.
The Physicians Committee, they created curricula. So there are different class series that are aimed at different, under different themes. But in the end, it's about showing people some recipes to show them how doable it is to cook for yourself. And we also teach how you eat out and find some food, how you travel with it. That's part of it too. But the main thing is just showing, here are my ingredients. I'm putting them together in this way, and then the class participants, they all get to eat. That's a very important part of a Food for Life class, because people need to taste that the food tastes good. You go for the training, or these days they actually, since COVID, they do the training online. Then the Physicians Committee certifies you as a Food for Life instructor.
And then now you're here.
When I myself was looking for a doctor, I went to the PlantBased Doc webpage because I had a few bad experiences before, and I was like, I can't do this anymore with other doctors.
Traditional doctors.
Yeah. And I found Dr. Bandana Charlotte, and
they're lifestyle medicine physicians.
They actually hadn't done the lifestyle medicine, the board certification yet, because it didn't exist yet. It was in I think I met her in 2016. I had just trained as a Food for Life instructor.
Okay. They were plant-based physicians.
They were already completely plant-based,
yeah.
I specifically looked up who. Yeah. And she was the only one listed in Houston at the time, except for Dr. Baxter Montgomery. And I talked, like, my first meeting with her as a patient was actually just me talking about Food for Life instructor and PCRM, and they had, at that time, they had already met Dr. Neil Barnard over dinner, and they were really on the same trajectory, and then a few years later, they did the board certification in lifestyle medicine, and then they opened this wonderful space here where there is space, right? They built a little kitchen, and so then I started to do cooking demos here. I do them here, and then this past summer, someone who works for Harris County Public Libraries, she asked me if I would do cooking demos at libraries. It was the first time I did cooking demos at a library. It was really, so the audience I attracted before, there were either people who already knew and just wanted to learn more details about the cooking. So I didn't tell them anything new about the why. Or I had some people who they came because they knew me. And the why, in that one class or whatever they came to, I couldn't get completely through. I planted maybe a little seed, but it wasn't a big revelation and revolution for them.
When you say the why, you mean as far as the ethics?
No, as the reason behind why whole food plant-based is healthier.
As far as why it's preventative against chronic disease.
Yeah, in the Food for Life classes, it's strictly based on the medical reasons behind it. We are not talking about ethics at all. Yeah. Even so, Physicians Committee has an ethical branch to it, but not in the Food for Life classes. It's not just that the menu is vegan. I actually signed a contract with them that I am vegan.
Did they make you do that, or did you make them do that?
No. They made us do it. It was an interesting moment during the training.
That's cool. Wow, I should have that. For me to interview, you got to sign this contract.
Yes.
Is this all you do?
No, I still work at the University of Houston. I work for the Texas Center for Superconductivity.
What is that?
Superconductivity is a phenomenon where material loses all the resistance to an electrical current. So an electrical current can go through and there's no heat produced, there's no loss. And another side to that same phenomenon is that the material cannot be penetrated by a magnetic field. So you get superconducting levitation, where if you have a magnet and your superconductor would sit on that magnetic field, like the magnetic field is a pillow that totally supports the superconductor, or you can flip it upside down because the superconductor needs to be cooled. So we have, that's the other half of my brain is working on a big events that's going to happen at the Applied Superconductivity Conference, where we will have a demonstration object where a person can stand on a magnetic disk that floats on top of a superconductor. I teach this to the public, to school children or whoever. We are going to have an open house and we're going to go into schools, and I do the similar things here in Houston, where during the summer we had summer camps, and I also taught it to educators and so.
What are some exciting things on the horizon for stuff like that?
Well, one exciting thing is that in Japan they built a superconducting levitating train, and they finished a short segment of the new line, but the rest is near finishing. There are some segments where there are still problems with permits, but it's going to be a second very, very fast train out of Tokyo.
It levitates?
It levitates. It doesn't touch the ground.
How high?
Just a little bit. It's
Oh.
not much needed. It's not like, floating up like this.
And that makes it more efficient, I guess.
Efficient, because there is no
And
friction.
resistant.
Right? There is no friction, nothing. You only have the air resistance. It's like being in a plane, and it goes nearly as fast.
As a plane, yeah, wow.
But at ground level. Something else that you probably are familiar with but don't associate it with superconductivity is MRIs, the magnetic resonance imaging. They are all possible because of superconductors, because it needs very strong magnets. And with these superconductors, you can also build very strong magnets. And there are many other aspects to it.
So you do that, you do some of these food for life, cooking demos, and what else?
I have a fairly big garden. The back garden is 50 by 50 feet, and then there's a front garden, and I can barely keep up with it. Wow. But I have citrus trees, I have fig trees, I have vegetable beds. I have 8 different citrus trees, different varieties. I bought some new fig trees, don't tell my husband. So I'm going to have 3 varieties of figs. I have blackberries. Winter season here is really good because you can have all the greens you want, basically. So we had lots of lettuces, we had tons of cilantro, we had collard greens, kale. I had parsley and parsley root, we had kohlrabi, carrots. Then spring was not so kind. The tomatoes grew well, but then the stink bug came, and you couldn't eat them.
Oh wow, you
They're
have those here.
leaf-footed stink bugs. Yeah, when I first saw them, I was like, that's a very exotic-looking beetle. They get about that big, and they have these legs where it looks like leaves on the legs. And then the juvenile stages, they are orange and black. They look stunning. And then I'm
Real invasive though. They have them in North Carolina.
Totally take them over, and I lose a little bit of my veganism. Oh no, the first years in my garden I had beautiful Tahitian squash. Tahitian squash can get big like this. They make a long, long neck, and then there's the bulb where the seeds are, and it tastes not quite as sweet as butternut squash, but very good. And they are also good here because at every segment where there is a leaf, it also puts a root down. So when you have squash stem borers, they are fairly resilient. After year 3, the squash stem borers are so prolific that my poor little squash can't keep up anymore. So the one thing that still really works in my garden in summer is sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes. I'm getting ready to start harvesting.
Sweet potatoes, citrus trees, maybe some greens, right?
Greens in the winter, lettuce, collard, kale, sugar snap peas. That was a good harvest too.
One of my dreams is to have a food forest one day.
Yeah, it's worth it.
In many gardens, but that sounds like you might be a little ahead of me. I have a couple of fig trees, but I just have one kind of fig tree. But this year was so prolific, and
wow, we didn't get anything. The spring was so dry. It was dry till I think beginning of August basically, and then it was rain. Really a lot of rain, and now it's dry again. I need to probably install a watering system because I cannot keep up watering. I was watering till past midnight, starting after 10 p.m. Because once it's late enough in the night, the mosquitoes are really not bad anymore. And it was cool and pleasant, so I would be out there in the middle of the night watering the yard. My husband goes to bed, and I'm sleep deprived next morning.
So, is your husband vegan?
Yeah, he is now. That's really great. Yeah. When he started dating me, he was looking on the internet and he found a web page supposedly that's called "What to Do When You Date a Vegan," and it would sort of delineate different type of vegans if you have any chance or if you're already done just by not being vegan. Well, he was lucky, and so am I now. Oh, and he's retired now, he plays flute and guitar.
Oh, cool.
And his heart's desire is that I have a little bit more time to make music with him because I play violin and viola. It's also one way for me to be known in the church I'm going to, the First Unitarian Universalists. And when I trained to be a Food for Life instructor, I approached them about doing food demos, and I taught actually a class, but at that time it was different pastors and different administration. It sort of was frustrating and difficult. Things changed, like talking to other choir members and talking to people in the church. When I talked about it 7 years ago, I would sort of get a little bit of blank look. And nowadays people sit there and nod. So with the church, I really got involved into the climate aspect of food. Gave some presentations there. One back before COVID, we had monthly in-person meetings, and I started bringing food. I would call it a potluck even, so I was basically the person to bring food. Maybe someone else brought some food and some sprouts and stuff like that. But I tried to convince them to at least try out the food I was bringing.
Yeah. What about activism? Do you ever get into that beyond what you do with the Food for Life?
Well, pre-COVID, I have a friend here, Michael Batty. He has an organization called Vegan for Life. I did tabling with them a few times. For the plant-based treaty, I'm the Houston representative right now. I did something for Earth Fest here in spring. I haven't done anything since because my summer was so busy, but I want to do more with them.
And you did stuff yesterday, right?
Yeah, I did a cooking demo yesterday at the retreat.
Did you help maybe organize that a little bit or anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking about the Peaceful Planet Foundation. I can never remember the whole name.
Peaceful Planet Foundation. That's it. You got it. PBF.
But no, there's the retreat is
added on.
Yeah.
It's their annual retreat. So I'm sure Bandana and Monish talked about it, that the Peaceful Planet Foundation, the main work is actually with children, and then there's the annual retreat for.
They let you, I guess, share this space for Food for Life.
Yeah, I did a cooking demo, but I did it together with another Food for Life instructor here in Houston, Leah Stoller. Leah Stoller actually, after Plant Pure Nation came out, she started a local group here, together with her daughter, and they named it Bayou City Beat. At the end of my first cooking demo series at the church, it ends with a potluck, but by the end I only had 2 participants. So I invited all my Bayou City Beat friends to come to this potluck, and we had the first successful whole food plant-based potluck in Houston. And then shortly after, Leah said, I think you should be the leader of Biocity Beat, and she just handed it over to me.
So are you still doing that?
I'm still doing it. So when we do potlucks here at the Lifestyle Clinic, it's joint Biocity Beat and MB Lifestyle Dogs.
Okay, cool.
And I put out a monthly, well, 1 to 2 times a month, a newsletter, and let people know about events. And then other people started pods, Plant Pure groups in Houston, and we joined together as Plant Pure Houston. That's really nice to have support. I mean, after all, I joined a group in order to be with other people for whom that's normal. Another pod leader in the area, she came yesterday to the retreat with her 2 boys, and she said if nothing else, it was really eye-opening for her boys to see that it's not just mommy and the parents who eat this way, that there are many, many people to whom this is normal.
Nice. Now, when you do these Food for Life classes, what's that like?
There are demonstrations. You can also do them hands-on, and I haven't done a Food for Life class hands-on. Well, during COVID, of course, I did online Food for Life classes. And in the end, I tried where people were cooking along. A few people cooked along. I recently did a sushi, not a Food for Life, but a sushi class here, and we did it hands-on. I really would like to get more into the hands-on, because eating the food is good for people, right? Because they can taste it tastes okay. But if it's hands-on, then they also know that they can actually do it. Yeah. Because I have some participants here to whom cooking is not something they have done in the past, and they say, well, you make it look so easy. And so that is not a confidence builder if they think, I make it look easy, and they don't feel that in themselves, that it's doable. And so between here and then someone else who contributes to the retreat and who has a space in the Houston Heights that is set up for hands-on, I really want to get some hands-on stuff going.
In one of these demos, you typically have like...
We do typically 3 different dishes. Okay. So there is often something that could be like a breakfast item, so from oatmeal or quinoa porridge to a smoothie, something, or tofu scramble. That's common items that's sort of more breakfasty. And then there is something that's maybe a pasta salad or a bean, like hummus or bean dip or something along those lines, and then a main dish. And they're all really quite simple. You can get fancy, like with different spices, and so I try to talk about it. You know, depending on what your choice is, how you want to do cooking, you can go and buy the spice mixtures. Or if you're a foodie and you love cooking, you can buy all the different spices and do your own creation and, you know, have a spice grinder. So you can really go any which way. You can go as convenient as possible, or you can go as, you know, I enjoy cooking and I want to utilize my brain and my taste buds and whatever to create something or to get that same satisfaction out of cooking that I used to get out of cooking.
What was the main thing that made you go whole food plant-based?
That was really for my health, because I used to weigh 240 pounds. When I started it, I actually wasn't quite as high, but yeah, I mean, weight still is a big thing. And then the trigger was that a very close friend of mine had triple bypass surgery. That was fairly traumatic. One of the friends, she had acid reflux. They cut out oil in their diet at home, and she had, with acid reflux, she had to watch a few other things. The thing is that I did regularly stuff with them, but one of their treats for them was once in a while to go out and eat. That's when we mostly were hanging out, right? And you don't really learn about whole food plant-based eating in a restaurant. For most restaurants, if they're vegan or not, you don't learn about how to make a dish tasty without oil. You don't learn how to make it tasty with whole rice and lots of vegetables. It's just not, that's not restaurant life for the most part. So when they talked to me about cooking without oil, I was like, but how can I saute my onions without oil? I don't know if they didn't want to be lecturing or what it was, but they didn't come back and say, I can show you how to do it. And that's probably partly why I so enjoy these days to show people how to saute onions without oil, because it's really not that complicated.
Just a little bit of water, right?
I actually, in many cases, I don't use water for the onions. For garlic, I will use a little bit of water because it gets too hot.
Yeah, the onions have enough water.
They have so much water, yeah.
The whole food plant-based diet was pitched, and McDougall was the hook. I guess you watched some of his videos, maybe you read it. Did you read one of his books or something?
Back there in the beginning, actually, it was just everything from his webpage. I think by then he had really reorganized his webpage. There were very good explanations out there. It's interesting that sometimes you can hear the information and it's like blank, and then you hear the information and it's just, oh wow, that it made total sense. So a few years earlier, that whole discussions about what's better, saturated fat or unsaturated fat, or what unsaturated fat. I remember I spent one day where I didn't want to work on chemistry, just figuring out. There were people arguing that unsaturated fats are bad because they oxidize. And so it's much better to eat saturated fats. And the other people were saying, but saturated fats, clogs up your arteries and raises the LDL and stuff like that. Nobody in this chorus said, you don't need added fats. You get the fats from the food, and if it's in the food, there is no problem with the unsaturated fats oxidizing, because the plant fibers and the plant tissue actually protect the fats. Like if you take flaxseed and you squeeze out the oil, well, that oil seeds air one time and it starts oxidizing. But in the flaxseed, it doesn't oxidize. It's the same like when you take a grain, a wheat grain, it takes years for the oil in the wheat germ to taste oxidized and rancid. You take a wheat grain and you grind it into flour, it tastes rancid within days, right? That's why back in 1981, when my family went into this whole trip, raw food, but actually I forgot to say, not just raw food, but also whole food. We bought a mill and we started to grind our own flours to make bread. And my mom, she made cake all the time. So we made cake from whole wheat that was freshly ground. And I can totally taste that difference if I have to buy my flour in the store, where it sits some days and it just tastes rancid to me, or if it's freshly ground. So maybe there the chemistry knowledge kicks in, because I know what a saturated fat is, I know what an unsaturated fat is. I understand about oxidation.
It makes perfect sense that you would go vegan, not know exactly how to do it. Nobody goes from like eating normal, not knowing how to eat, to suddenly becoming vegan and knowing exactly how to eat. Nobody does that. It's a natural progression, I think, that you made.
And I think that's part of the task for us these days, is actually to make good, healthy vegan food available to people so they can taste it. Have dip their toe in and say, oh, that's what that can be. To make that transition easier for people, so they don't have to, most people don't have the energy or the drive or life circumstances to struggle through that until something happens health-wise, or they somehow get themselves to watch Dominion or Earthlings, or they look into the abyss we create climate-wise. I mean, these are strong motivators. And then there is still, how do you deal with, when you're confronted with that, do you say, I don't have space for this in my life, I just need to manage my life and turn off? Or if you actually turn towards it and struggle through. Because it's a lot to struggle through.
Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think would be cool to get out there?
Maybe for all of us activists, at whatever level we are active, to find that balance between caring and giving space to people, keep loving people no matter what they do, and just say, I dropped a little seed and hopefully other people come and drop more seeds till something shifts. Just see that there are more of us, so it's easier on each of us.
What's a day of eating like for you now?
My husband really likes variation in his food, so we can go from a sweet breakfast to a very savory breakfast. So my favorite breakfasts are probably when we have a vegetable soup with miso. He makes it with some pasta in it, so there is something filling. For me, it probably would be better if instead of pasta it was some whole grain. I also love to just cook some grains like millet and to eat those with a fruit. Like I love millet and cherries. And I make soy yogurt. Many people have that recipe out there where you take the soy milk and you take a probiotic. I have an Instant Pot that has a yogurt maker function in it, or you have some yogurt maker, or figure out a heat source that is not too hot, and mix the soy milk and put the probiotic on in jars. I put the lid on, I put it in the yogurt maker, and after 6 hours, I let them go extra long because I like it sour. After 8 hours, they are done. So if someone is interested in that, the only thing to watch out for, you need a soy milk that is really like soybeans and water, and you need a soy milk that is concentrated enough if you really want a stiff yogurt. You want something that has at least 100 calories per cup, or if I drop a name brand, Eden soy milk is 120 calories per cup and has a very nice flavor. It is somewhat on the expensive side, but if you look at the calories, it's no more expensive than silk because it's water and thickness. Tofu scramble is one of our favorite breakfasts. We love Indian food, and so we started to make dosas, and then dosas became the all-round pancake. So we also put like food compote into dosas. Then a few years ago, I figured out, I grew up with making, but in my family we call thin pancakes. They're like crepes, they're about that big, very thin. From some quinoa pizza crust recipe that never worked for me, I decided to use that basic idea to use quinoa to make thin pancakes. So it's just soaked quinoa that are blended you need a fast blender to crunch up those quinoa seeds. Blend it with some water, a pinch of salt, if you feel like it's some baking powder, and just pour the batter into a pan, make it thin pancake, and they make beautiful, roll-ups. They work for sweet, they work for savory. And then lunch, lately not that much, but for years I needed to take a lunch to work. We would batch cook something on the weekend dominantly and fill it into glass jars and put the lid on while it's hot. Then there's a little bit of air space, and as it cools down, it pulls a vacuum. These glass jars stay okay in the refrigerator for several weeks. And that way we would have like 4, 5, 6 different dishes in the refrigerator. We didn't have to eat 1 week long the same dish. We snatch up one of those glass jars, and my husband makes, like in a 2.5 gallon container, he makes a basic salad mixture. So it's lettuce, radish, carrots, parsley. That's his base mixture. And then add some other vegetables and a salad dressing. That would be a good lunch to take to work. And then dinner can be something similar. My husband is very busy with music and all kinds of things. So sometimes it's just a repeat. And sometimes, especially when we're both together, we love making like tacos, so like a tortilla with some filling. Either it can be from tofu scramble over refried beans and then vegetables. And it's easy, it's fast.
You ever eat any mock meats?
At home, we have it every few years we try something. I sort of like this seitan, but when I think about what seitan is, it's you take the protein from a from the wheat, right? Protein content in wheat is, I don't know, between 7 and 11% or something like that. So what happens with all that starch? It just doesn't make that much sense to me. We will like bake tofu for sure. I really like the soy curls, because the soy curls is simply cooked soybeans that are extruded into these shapes, and they do an amazingly good job. One of our basic standard beloved recipes that are a little bit labor intensive is barbecue jackfruit. In a twist, so that's why it's labor intensive, because we don't buy the canned jackfruit. We actually buy a fresh jackfruit. So most people would be surprised about it because it's very sweet, but then barbecue sauce usually has lots of sugar in it. So we can make a barbecue sauce that has no sugar because it comes from the jackfruit. And it's the most super tasty thing.
You get the whole big old fruit?
My husband has done the whole fruit, but often like at H Mart, you can either buy a small one or like a half. He will buy like 12 pounds of jackfruit.
I haven't bought one yet, so I know what they look like, but I haven't cut into one.
There's a bit of waste on it because all of the rind and all of the foamy stuff, that doesn't taste good. But so we use all the fruit and some of those, where that fibrous stuff is, we use all of that. And then, my husband is a bit of a foodie, so he goes to the Spanish spice market and buys the different peppers and grinds his own pepper mixture, then with tomato paste and onions and garlic. And he buys the tamarind and makes tamarind paste. It looks like a bean, right? And you take the hard outer shell off, and then you boil. On the interior, it's like a paste. It's a bit like dates. But then on the inside, there are these bean seeds, because it's a legume. And so you boil it in some water, and then you have to strain it out. It's a bit of work.
You think this is something that everybody can afford to do?
For many other people, the stigma is rather that it's cheap food. It's the food that poor people eat. Plant-based, it's what people ate. Even like my family growing up, remember, we only had meat twice a week. So plant-based was the base. We always had, unfortunately, the bacon stuff with it, but that was only a flavoring. That wasn't really for the nutritional value. What gets you through is eating beans and lentils and peas and eating potatoes and sweet potatoes. And also, like, I'm sure what we will do in the near future, because the climate is going to change and many of the crops aren't working that well, we will have to eat buckwheat and millet and smaller grains that have shorter growing cycles. So, I mean, some scientists are desperately working on to get lentils to grow instead of 3 months growing cycle into a 2 months growing cycle. Because then if the conditions are still right, you can have 3 crops instead of 2 crops, right? So if the conditions are worse, there isn't enough rain, for example, then stuff needs to be able to grow in the time where there is still enough humidity, let's say, in the soil from the winter, because spring comes early and comes hot and it's dry and whatever. So yeah, we need to
invest more in finding
in that kind of research, but also like our taste. They are not the sort of bland grains like wheat. And then of course most people are used to
hyper palatable
and also like let's take the example of wheat. They're not used to whole wheat, right? They're used to something that has no flavor on its own, and then the flavor is mixed in other ways, right? It doesn't bring a flavor on its own. A grain like buckwheat has a very strong flavor, which is great if you need the flavor from the grain, but it interferes with people's idea of what food is supposed to be like.
Well, I appreciate your time. And are you accessible on the internet or anything?
I don't have my own webpage. I have a Facebook page, Karolina's Plant Kitchen.
Oh, cool.
Which I'm not visiting that often, but yeah, it's there.